brother, my friend, my colleague, Michael Sugrue, former Walnut Creek police sergeant, former Air Force Zoomie like me. No one appreciates his story more than me, especially having been in law enforcement for as long as we both have. You guys are going to hear a really great story tonight. Mike is definitely going to share his experiences, and hopefully we can all take away some nuggets of wisdom. So without further ado, everybody, Michael Sugrue.
All right. Thanks everybody for being here tonight. I appreciate it. And I just, like I said in the beginning, I really want to encourage you to ask questions. So as I'm speaking or something comes up, keep that in mind. And one thing I will tell you is that I'm an open book. I have nothing to hide and everything to share. I'm in a unique position where I can actually do that. So again, if something comes to mind or something you want to know that I didn't mention or go into detail about, please ask me specifically. I'm just going to go ahead and start with my biggest critical incident that happened in my life. It was kind of the turning point for my life and what ended up happening with my life. There's a lot of incidents that I dealt with throughout my career that I'll go into potentially. But the one that I'm going to first mention is basically the backbreaker, the thing that just broke me in half. And to put things in perspective, I'm going to take you back to December of 2012. And what I want you to know about my life at that time was that I literally had just bought my dream house. There was a neighborhood that I wanted to live in my whole entire life. And I was able to purchase this house literally across the golf course from my parents' house. I was happily married at this point for about 4 years. And I had a beautiful daughter who was about 2.5 years old. And she was and is my everything today, just everything. And I got promoted very quickly throughout my career. And so when I got promoted to sergeant, it was unexpected, but definitely very welcomed. And as a new sergeant, we go through a kind of informal training program where we ride along with other sergeants for a week or two until we get cut loose on our own. It's similar to a field training program for actual at the officer level, but it's just much more informal and it's much shorter. And so I'm going to take you to the day after Christmas, which is when this shift started. And at this point, I was actually only on my second solo week as a sergeant. So brand new sergeant. I was working the graveyard shift. We started at 9:30 at night, again, the day after Christmas. And we were due to get off at 7:30 in the morning. And this was my Friday. I knew it was going to be a slow shift. Holidays always are. I was already making plans for the weekend. It was very just a relaxed kind of vibe around the department. I remember driving into work, just thinking about, it's going to be a slow shift. It's going to go by quick and the weekend's going to be here. Locker room, everybody's joking. Everybody's in a good mood. They've had a good holiday, hanging out with their family and friends. We go down a lineup. It's pretty much uneventful. Back then we had day shift, swing shift, and graveyard shifts. And we actually had the swing shift was still on when we started. And the lieutenant came to our lineup. He was in charge till about midnight, and then he was going home. And from that point on, it was going to be me as far as in charge of the entire city until we got off duty. Shift was very, very slow. Not much traffic out on the streets. All the businesses are closed. I did some stops because I love making traffic stops. I love pulling people over. I got a hard time from my troops because they're like, hey, it's Christmas, cut people a break. But, I was having a good time. So I did a few stops. Ended up getting some food later on in the evening with one of my patrol officers. We hopped over the border into Nations, got a huge bacon cheeseburger, Dr. Pepper. And it was just going great. I literally had about 4 hours left of the shift. So I went to a dark parking lot and I started reviewing reports because I knew I had to get these reports done before the end of shift. And it's dead silent. I mean, literally, there has not been any calls for service on the radio for hours. No one's doing any stops. So it's just crickets on the air. I mean, nothing whatsoever. All of a sudden, out of the blue, our female dispatcher, the only one on duty at the time, she gets on the air and she is absolutely frantic. I have never heard her voice like this before. I mean, I just immediately, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I'm getting goosebumps. And she puts out in the air that there's a woman inside a condo and there's a man armed with a knife. And she gives the address. I recognize the area right away. Immediately, I throw my binder to the side, put my car in drive, lights and sirens are on, just trying to drive there as fast as I can. I know the general area, but I don't know this exact address where it's at. It's a condominium with attached condominiums on all sides. There's courtyards. It's very confusing. Halfway there, the dispatcher gives an update and says, now that the boyfriend and girlfriend are now barricaded inside the bedroom. And I was totally confused. I actually asked for clarification and said, is the boyfriend the one with the knife, or is there a third party with a knife inside the condo? And she said, no, there is a third party with a knife. So again, at this point, I mean, adrenaline is just pumping. My heart is racing, and I'm just already imagining in my mind what I may see, and just mayhem and blood and just horrible thoughts. But I know I have to get there as fast as I can. Literally, I pull on the street. It's a very dark street. Addresses are hard to see. I pull up right in front of the main complex. And as I'm doing so, I'm getting ready to get out of the car, and the dispatcher starts screaming and screaming, saying, units, there's a struggle. And the line went dead. She lost all communication at that point with everybody inside that condo. As I'm getting out of my car, I can hear blood-curdling screams coming from a distance. I can hear it's a female voice, and it sounds like somebody's being killed or somebody's dying. To this day, it's the worst sound I've ever heard. And thank God, as I look over my shoulder, I see my partner pulling up right behind me. We have more officers on the way, but at this point, we know we have to get to this condo. We have no choice, and we can't wait. So we just start running towards the screams. Eventually, we get into this huge courtyard, and we're looking frantically for the numbers of this place. And it just goes dead silent. I mean, it went from these blood-curdling screams to just an eerie silence where I'm not seeing anybody. I mean, there's no one outside. There's no animals. There's no noises. It's just dead quiet. We find the unit, and I start giving commands, and I try to kick open the door just repeatedly. Nothing's happening. And my partner motions to me, and she sees there's this huge window. It's the size of a door. It's a louvered window, and it's shattered inside the condominium. And this is a 2-story condominium, it turns out. We just look at each other, and we know we got to go in. We give our commands, our guns are out. She goes in first. It brings us into a kitchen. We sweep it. Inside the kitchen, there's like a cutout where you can see into the next rooms. And there's combined dining room and like living room, family room. And there's no one there. It's dark. There's no obvious signs of a struggle. We then turn to the bottom of the stairwell. And at this point, we know the downstairs is clear. There's no one down there. We've cleared the entire space. But we know we have to go upstairs because that's where this couple is, and that's where this person with the knife is.
All right, Kirby.
Our guns are out. We're giving commands, and nothing at first. And this seems like eternity, but I'm literally talking about seconds here. And all of a sudden, a male subject partially comes out. I can only see the left side of his body, and I can't see his right arm or his right hand. His eyes are just wide open. They're glazed over. He's sweating profusely, and he's just staring straight through us as if we're not there. I mean, the best way to describe it is like a zombie, like something from a horror movie. I mean, he has absolutely no physical body or facial reaction or even eye reaction to anything we're doing. He comes out a little bit farther, and my partner yells, he's got a knife, he's got a knife. And I looked at his right hand, and at first I was confused, and I saw a blue object in his hand. And it was in his right hand, it was clenched. And she said, hey, he's got a knife, he's got a knife. And I'm looking, and I don't know if it's the adrenaline or the hyper focus or the tunnel vision, but I was able to see the glint of the blade. I was able to confirm, in fact, it was a knife. It was a large butcher knife. At this point, he's just standing there staring at us, clenched, both hands at his side, with this large butcher knife just pointed at us. During this time, 2 more officers come into the condominium, a male officer and a female officer. One of the officers, I tell them to get a taser, and so he does. And he positions himself behind my partner and I. She has her gun out. She's the one that first came in with me. and the other female officer is perpendicular to the stairwell. Next thing you know, without notice, the subject comes up and puts the knife in a stabbing position, starts coming towards us. And I shoot my weapon, and my partner shoots her weapon, and it's just, at this point, it's just a big blur. Next thing you know, he's down at the bottom of the stairs. I can't see if he's been hit. I can't see if he's been wounded. I don't see blood. I don't see any visible injuries. My one partner, the two officers, they retreated to the family room. And the other guy that had the taser, he dropped it. He pulled out his gun, and we're literally both like 3-4 feet away from this subject. And he's laying on his right side, but he's still clenching this large butcher knife. And again, our guns are pointed at him, and we're yelling, "Drop the knife, drop the knife." And he starts coming back up towards us. And there's no nice way to say it. He was killed instantly. I mean, devastating wounds. His entire eye was gone. He was done, dead. I can't say it in a nice way. We did what we had to do. He was in between us and the couple upstairs. I had officers go upstairs and check on the couple, and it turns out this subject had been literally stabbing through the bedroom door with this butcher knife, and the door was coming off the hinges. This couple had been physically barricading their bodies against this door to prevent him from coming inside their bedroom and killing them. When they came down, there was a male and a female, and the male was just stoic. He was in absolute shock, no reaction. The female was just crying and bawling, and she was a mess. And that's when it hit me. It just all hit me all of a sudden. I can't believe this just happened. And I'm in a state of shock, and I have to literally pull myself together. And I remember she gave me a hug, and I just lost it. I started bawling. I started crying like a baby. I mean, I had never done that my entire life. And part of me was embarrassed, but part of me was just, this sense of relief came over me, and my body weight just dropped down. I felt her weight, and it was so comforting to feel her hug. And we got him outside, and we had to check on the neighbors. And that was the incident. And there was so much happened that morning after that incident. I remember being driven back to the police department and separated and brought into a locker room with a reserve officer that I didn't know, who was standing there watching me get undressed, who was collecting my uniform and my gun and my duty belt and putting them in evidence bags. I remember being taken out in a hallway and getting photographs taken of me, of my entire body, of my hands. I'm turning my hands upside down. I mean, I feel like an absolute criminal is the best way to describe it. And I can't believe, I understand why it's happening, but when I'm in it, I just feel like a criminal, and I feel like everything is just coming down on me. But I still have this sense of shock, like this is just some bad nightmare that I want to wake up from, that I want to end. This couldn't have happened. Not in the city I worked in. This stuff never happens. There hadn't been a shooting in my city in like 12 or 14 years. And there hadn't been one my entire time there. This just doesn't happen. I remember being brought into another room, and we waited hours and hours until finally we were interviewed. And I lost it during the interview again. I just started bawling and crying. And there was investigators and my supervisor, and I was embarrassed. I was absolutely embarrassed, but I was exhausted. I've been up for over 24 hours at this point. Eventually, we were allowed to go home, and I remember, thank God, an officer from my department, he drove me home. I lived about 35 minutes away, and I was in no condition to drive. And I remember the look on my wife at the time and my daughter. They greeted me at the door, and I felt so detached. I felt just so numb. I mean, I didn't want to talk to them. I saw them, but I just wanted to go up to my room, and I wanted to close the door and turn off the lights and just sleep this away. I wanted to just pretend like this didn't happen. This had to be a nightmare. This couldn't be real. And that started my isolation. That started my drinking. It started my denial. And I just felt so cut off. We had multiple investigations going on. We had an IA investigation, a DA investigation. And I literally cannot talk about this with anybody, at least so I thought. I mean, I had my lawyer. I didn't have any therapists or clinicians that I trusted at that time. I couldn't talk to anybody in my agency about it. And I just felt alone and isolated. And not only that, I didn't think anybody would even understand what I went through or what I was going through. I felt like there was something wrong with me. I felt like what I was going through wasn't normal, and I was embarrassed by it. And so I was gonna cover it up, and I was gonna push it away. And what I didn't tell you is that we were sued immediately by the family, civil lawsuit. And this lawsuit drug on for almost 4 years. 4 years where I had to live through depositions with the father of the subject sitting directly across the table from me, staring at me for 8 hours, knowing that I killed his son. And I have to relive this every year because we have constant depositions. In our county, we have what's called a coroner's inquest. And that's in a courtroom. There's a judge, there's a full jury, it's open to the public. What it does is it determines kind of like the mode or manner of death, whether it was accidental, by the hands of another. There's all kinds of different findings, which I won't go into detail now. But it's something that happens in our county anytime there's a death where officers are present. So it could be a custody death. It could be a fatal car accident from pursuit. It could be from a shooting. And by this point, 5 months later, my marriage is already starting to fall apart. My drinking is getting worse. And so I have this hearing, and I invite my wife to it because I haven't told her what happened. I haven't shared what I'm going through. And I want her to be there so she can hear it for herself, and I don't have to explain it to her. And she can just experience it and hopefully understand it, and hopefully understand me and what I'm going through. Because I never talked about work. Not just this incident, but before this incident, I didn't talk about work. I kept work at work and home at home. And that's one of the mistakes I made, and I'll go into that. I don't recommend doing that. But at this hearing, there was reporters. There's probably 20 different people from my agency. There was the family members, the person I killed, his grandparents, his parents, his step-parents. Oh, and I didn't tell you, he has an identical twin brother, by the way, who looks just like him. And so I'm in this courtroom and I'm waiting to testify. And this is the first time I heard the dispatch tapes that night and the radio calls. And it just immediately sucked me right back to that night. I started sweating profusely. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My heart started pounding and I felt like I was going to pass out. I literally just took me right back to that night. And I got up on the stand. And I remember this jury was literally like 3 feet from me. And I have to tell them what happened. And I'm telling them, and the look on their face. And I ended up just losing it and breaking down and crying in this courtroom of literally like 60 people. People I work with. I mean, people I don't know. And I'm sitting here crying like a baby. I've never cried like my entire life. I don't do that. I'm an ex-Air Force officer. I'm a police sergeant. I don't cry. And definitely not in a courtroom. I was so ashamed and so embarrassed that the judge, he said, "Thank you, Sergeant. We have what you need. You're excused." I literally left the courtroom 5-10 minutes max to put some water in my face, like get my shit together, compose myself. They took a quick recess, went back into the courtroom. The officers did outstanding. They all testified. We got through it. About 2 weeks later, one of my administrators calls me into the office, and I'm thinking this is good. I'm thinking, you know what? I'm a brand new sergeant. We literally saved lives, saved our officers' lives. I mean, saved this couple. No one got hurt. Like, this doesn't happen in our city. We got the finding that we wanted, by the way, in this coroner's inquest. We got the best possible finding. And so I'm thinking I'm getting called in there to give me some kudos, like, hey, great job, like, way to save lives, like, way to lead out there on the scene, right? This is what I'm expecting. So I'm kind of pumped up. I'm feeling kind of good. I go in there, and there's a couple administrators in there. And I can tell this isn't good right away. I can just feel, I can feel it. This is not good. And I'm totally like, I don't know what's going on. And then it happens. A couple key things happen. And I talk about this, not to talk bad about my agency, because I love my agency and there's great people there. But this is a pivotal moment in my decision-making process of not to get help and not to get better. And this caused me to spiral down the path of self-destruction. And this is why I mentioned this. And so I'm sitting there in this room, and the first thing that happens is that the genuineness of my emotions got called into question. And what I mean by that, it was inferred or said directly that I was acting or putting on a show for the jury. And so can you imagine me as a grown man in my 40s, Air Force captain, police sergeant, who hasn't gotten emotional his entire life, and now the very essence of that is being questioned. My integrity, which is my everything, is being called into question. And then my leadership abilities get called into question. Not checking in on me like, hey, can we do something for you? Can we get you some help? And you know what? Here's another mistake I made is I should have stuck up for myself at this moment. I made a mistake. I didn't speak up for myself because I was a military guy. If you outranked me, and especially if you're in command or administrator, it was yes, sir, yes, ma'am, no, sir, no, ma'am. And that was it. There's not going to be any questioning. There's not going to be any back talk. I'm just going to nod my head, say, let's do this, and I'm going to press on with the mission. And that's what I did. I made a conscious decision. I was never going to show emotion again. I was never going to show weakness. I was going to prove them wrong. And oh, by the way, the probationary status of being a sergeant got extended, which I'd never heard of. And so my promotion was in jeopardy. And so I said, you know what? F this. I'm going to prove you guys all wrong. And so what happened? I became an asshole. I became unapproachable. I didn't care. I wasn't sympathetic. I wasn't empathetic. I didn't want to hear what you had to say. If I was supervising you and you had a problem, it was like, that doesn't sound like a problem to me. It just doesn't. And I was thinking to myself the whole time, like, you have no idea what it means to have a problem. And that's how much I lost sight. I lost sight on my purpose as a supervisor, as a leader. I was a sham. I mean, I can't tell you how many times after that, I had administrators come to me and say, you know, people are coming to us and they're saying you're unapproachable and you're hard to talk to and you're very demanding and you're a perfectionist and everything's got to be perfect. But not once do they say, is everything okay with you? Like, how's the home life? How's the marriage? How's your health? How's your relationships doing? No. And I wasn't going to tell them, right? Everything's good. I'm going to press on. But my marriage, it's gone. I'm going through a divorce. It's done. This lawsuit, it's happening. I'm in federal court now in San Francisco. This is now September 2016. I'm a defendant in federal civil court in San Francisco, one of the most liberal anti-cop places you can imagine. That alone, sitting there feeling like a criminal, because I was a defendant, and the jury just staring at us, and these expert witnesses coming in with these crazy theories, calling us cold-blooded murderers in the open courtroom. And oh, by the way, the family members were there every single day. And the guy that I killed, his identical twin brother, yeah, he was there too, sitting right behind me. So can you imagine this face that I'd seen in my nightmares, in my dreams for the last 4 years that I can't get out of my head, is now physically in the courtroom with me? I can't even put that into words, the toll that it takes. And on the breaks, as we're walking down the hallway and the family members are mumbling murderers under their breath and just giving us cold death stares. And I can't blame them. I really can't. But I felt horrible. I mean, I took a life. Right, wrong, and different. I took a life and I have to live with that. And we got through the trial. We prevailed. There are no winners, but we prevailed. And the judge, I remember, he said, and he's the brother of the Supreme Court Justice Breyer, he said, had it not been for our actions that night, more lives would have been lost. All I could think about was, at the end of that trial, is I wanted to talk to the father of the guy I killed. I wanted him to know that I was a human, that I didn't want this to happen, that I had no choice. And I was a father. And to this day, if he ever happens to listen to any of my interviews or anything I ever do, I just want to talk to that man and let him know. About a month after this, my life just started going down the shitter. I was putting my officer safety aside. I was purposely putting myself in dangerous situations at work. I was hoping I died on duty. I wasn't going to take my own life, but if I died on duty, I would have been a hero. I would have been remembered. Things would have been named after me. That was okay in my mind. That's okay. If I die on duty, even though I put my officer safety aside, I'm putting myself in situations I shouldn't, that was okay in my mind. That's how messed up I was. So this is now 2016. The trial ended end of September. Fast forward to the week right after Thanksgiving. I'm on duty, day shift in the sergeant's office. Call comes out, suicide in progress in my city. Turns out it's my best friend's house. My best friend. This man, Vietnam veteran, Army police, was in a deadly prison riot in Vietnam. He was a 35-year reserve officer with my department. He was my partner. We rode together. I knew everything about this man, and I had no idea he was suffering like this. No idea. I saw him just as they rushed him into the ER. He had slit both wrists. He had stabbed himself in the torso multiple times. He'd OD'd on multiple prescription medications. And I remember I had like 5 seconds with him, and I looked him straight in the eyes, and he was in and out of consciousness. And I told him he was going to be okay. I said, "You're going to get through this." I didn't think he was. I honestly didn't think he was. And thank God he's alive today. He's here today. I see him almost every single week. And that man is the man that saved my life. My best friend saved my life by trying to take his own life. About a month after that, I was off and I was in my car and I just broke down crying for 2 hours. And I finally got the strength and the courage to pick up the phone and ask for help. This is almost after 4 years of suffering. It was on the anniversary of my shooting, actually, 4 years later. And I called the watch commander and I said, "I can't do this. I need help." I mean, it sounds so crazy because I know today that's the bravest, the strongest, the most courageous thing I'd ever done in my life. But I was so ashamed and so embarrassed. I mean, so embarrassed. But I made a conscious decision at that moment. I wasn't going to do that to my daughter. I wasn't going to do that to my family. I saw the effect that my friend's suicide attempt had on me personally, but had on his family and on his friends. And there's no way I could do that. There's no way. He saved my life. And that started my path to recovery, which I'll be glad to go into. And there's a lot to that, but I kind of want to take a pause if I can and see if there's any questions or any comments up to this point before I go into the actual recovery.
I have something to say. I just wanted to say that when you said you saw your friend and you said he would be okay, how that changed your reasoning for never being able to take your own life. I have a coworker nurse friend who took her life, and I know when I was at my worst of my worst struggle, that remembrance of being at her funeral and how she had a church full of people that loved her, that was the key thing for me, that I knew I could never do what she did because, like you said, you saw the fallout from it. Just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you for sharing that. That's powerful. And I can definitely understand what you're saying. I mean, it will stick with me for the rest of my life. Absolutely.
Michael, can I jump in?
Absolutely.
We haven't met before. I'm Chris, my girlfriend Natalie.
Nice to meet you.
Not sure where to start, man, but I've been there, man. I know what you're going through. I buried 16 of my buddies in the line of duty. Been in 4 shootings myself. Watched an officer get killed right in front of my face. And dude, I just gotta say I'm proud of you, man. You've done amazing things to make it back. I don't know what to start, man. We gotta contact each other later on, more on a personal level. Not much more personal than this, but I just gotta say, man, everything you've gone through, everything you said has touched me in such a way that it obviously brought it all back for me as well. And my last really bad incident happened in 2016, very similar situation. And what you have expressed to us, man, I got to tell you, that is huge in your healing and in your growth. If you don't already know that, hearing it from another guy telling you right now, it's huge, man. I'm not telling you something you don't already pretty much know, but now I'm rambling. So anyways, I'll let somebody else jump in. I just want to say I'm proud of you, man, for what you did. And I'm glad you're still here. So.
And for sharing your story too.
Absolutely.
That takes a lot of courage.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. And we definitely will get to know each other offline.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely, man. And I apologize for everybody else for freaking bawling my eyes out here too, but it is what it is, man. So.
Oh,
you know what you're doing though, is that I learned to do this. You're speaking from the heart, and that's all you need to do. And it took me a long time to learn this. I'm getting teared up too, because you're making me tear up, but that's a good thing. Is that, you know what, if you just speak from the heart, you're always right. And for so long we suppress our heart, especially, I'm not being sexist here, but as men, we don't talk about our feelings and we don't talk about our emotions, and we're raised that way from little boys. And we're taught that that's weakness, and it's not weakness. By you doing what you just did here and sharing what you shared, that's strength and courage, brother. Absolutely.
Back at you, man. Back at you. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was very brave, Chris. Definitely, you know, it's all about growth. It's all about growth, brother, and this is the place to do it, right? This is our time. This is our show. This is our place to share those things, and that's what we're here to do, to support one another. You know, so nothing but love to you. Nothing but love to Mike too. You know, again, brother, your story, you know, I could listen to it a million times and I always take away something positive from it, because you too, and you too, Chris, you guys epitomize what I feel resiliency is. You know, you've been through some serious trauma, and, you know, interesting enough, we were talking about that in class today, where, you know, veterans, our trauma is somewhat compressed, right? We go on like a tour of duty, we get deployed overseas, and our traumas tends to be compressed because we're doing a tour of duty. Law enforcement, our trauma is as long as your career is, you know, and it's every day and it's consistent. And the problem is like you pointed out, as men, we don't talk about it. Why? Because there's a stigma. There's a stigma associated with us talking about our mental health, because we're supposed to be tough. We're supposed to be strong. We're supposed to suck it up. You know, when I got into the military, I was told, hey man, if we wanted you to have feelings, we would have issued them to you, right? We've all heard that at some point in our career, and that's just it's not how it needs to be. And what you guys are doing is really normalizing the conversation. So I personally couldn't be more grateful, especially as a former law enforcement leader, to hear you guys normalizing these type of conversations, because they need to be normalized 100%.
And that's the key, is that, you know, I felt alone for so long, and the fact is we're not alone. I mean, even just here, Chris, you and I have so much in common. You know, we just met on here, but the facts are that I talk about law enforcement, but I talk about all first responders. So paramedics, firefighters, dispatchers, police officers, we get exposed to so much day in and day out of just negativity, of pure evil, of just trauma. And it's not that you have to be in one big incident. We're involved in incidents every single day of our career for sometimes 30 years. And, you know, the public doesn't get it. I know most people on this call right now, you guys all get it. But this is where family members and people who, you know first responders, they need to get it. They need to understand it, what we go through, because it's not normal. You know, they say the average first responder or average police officer, minimum of 500 traumatic incidents in a career. And that could be upwards of 800 to 1,000 in a career. Whereas a normal person, a non-first responder, maybe one, maybe two, an entire lifetime. And I'm not even talking about childhood trauma now. That's a whole nother subject. That's a whole nother call. But, you know, the facts are that we are just exposed to just so much. And people don't call us on their best day. They call us on their worst day. I mean, I try to think about the good memories of my job, and there are some, but unfortunately what always comes to the top is all the bad memories. The suicides, the fatal car accidents, the child deaths, the domestic violence, the sexual assault cases, the overdoses, even just the natural deaths. All these things take a toll. And they're normal in our job on a daily basis. And, you know, part of my recovery, one of the most powerful things I did and I learned about through my therapist, I have a culturally competent therapist, and that is key to recovery, is that you have to have a culturally competent therapist. You just have to, period. They have to know it. They have to get it. And mine was, thank God. And she's helped save my life. But she told me about first responder support meetings. They have them all over the US. They definitely have them all over California, especially here in the Bay Area. And they're an hour long, 1 day a week, different locations for all first responders. And it's confidential. And I started going to those immediately. And that's where I saw people share, people I didn't know, who I just met, sharing these deep, powerful stories, some that go back to childhood that they didn't even share with their own spouses. And as you can imagine, you know, I came from an agency where I thought that was my brotherhood, my sisterhood. I thought that was my family. And some people were, but the organization is not your family. And it still strikes me to this day that I would be willing to go into an active shooter situation, and they would too, and have my back without hesitating. And we're going to run in there, we're going to take care of business knowing we may die. But how come I couldn't talk to anybody in my agency about what I was going through or how I felt? How come I didn't trust them enough to do that? But I trust them enough to have my back in battle or during wartime. How messed up is that? I mean, just thinking about that. And here I am literally meeting strangers for the first time. In the first couple meetings, I just sat back and watched, I listened, and I absorbed. And one day I got the strength to slowly start sharing. And sharing is healing. Sharing is power. You get this burden off your shoulders. And every time I talk, every time I share, there's more healing. And that is power. You know, is you got to have peers. You got to have people you can trust. You got to have people that get it and understand it. And that was huge for me to go to these meetings. And that led me to the West Coast post-trauma retreat. And I went to that 5 months later. If you guys aren't familiar with that, it's based out of California, but they have them everywhere now. I believe Oregon, Washington, Arizona, the Midwest. It's a week-long residential retreat only for first responders. And there's chaplains, peers, therapists, clinicians, and they give up their private practice for a week and all volunteer. And the same thing happened. But I was there again with a mixed group of first responders. There was 7 of us. Now it's 6 that go through. And again, I saw people sharing by the second day things they had never shared their entire lifetime. Not even with their husbands or wives or brothers or sisters. Think of the weight of that you've been holding this onto your entire life. But to see these people that literally just met me and these other people in a room full of people and share it, it's indescribable. I mean, you have to experience it. You have to see it. But that is power. And that's when you know you're not alone. And I can't emphasize this program enough. West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat. It's amazing, life-saving program. It's part of the First Responder Support Network. Highly encourage you to look it up. Again, it's for all first responders. It's a week long, and it is amazing. And that is where also I found out that most of these people that go to these first responder support meetings, there's usually people that have been through this program or other programs at those meetings. So again, more resources, more help available. I went through therapy. I still go to therapy. Therapy is amazing. Everyone should go to therapy. There's no end to it. You need to talk. You need to share. I'm still doing it. I'm still in recovery. But it's taken a long time. It took me over 2 years to the point where I could even tell people what I went through, to talk about my feelings, to share this stuff. It didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of work. And at some point, I had to make a conscious decision that I was going to medically retire. I made that decision. But what I didn't go into is there was a lot of administrative betrayal along the way when I was off. There was administrators that called me when I was trying to get better that were trying to talk me into retiring. There was an eye investigation dropped on me for something that supposedly happened 1.5 years earlier after I made the decision to retire, which held up my retirement. So again, hard to describe, unbelievable. That one almost pushed me over the edge again. But what did I do? I picked up the phone and I called the lead peer from the West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat. His name's Nick. And I talked to him for 2 hours. And again, he talked me down. He saved my life. But I had that resource where I could pick up the phone and I could call somebody I trusted. And that made the difference. I just recently went through another program in August called Save a Warrior. And I want to talk about this briefly. The beauty of Save a Warrior is it is free. There's no cost. Save a Warrior. Difference is it's open to military, either active duty or veterans. It's also open to first responders, current and former. They have 2 locations, Southern California and Ohio. It's a week long. This one is peer driven. This program focuses on complex PTS. So this tackles the childhood trauma that I really haven't gone into. But the reason why I mentioned this to you is I was over 2 years in recovery and I went through Save a Warrior not thinking I would get anything out of it. And this gave me a critical piece that I didn't realize I was missing and that I needed. It was absolutely life-changing. I mean, amazing. I can't recommend these programs enough. Both programs are amazing. Save a Warrior, West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat. Again, the big thing I want you to remember about Save a Warrior is it's open to military, whether it's current active duty, veterans, and first responders, dispatchers, firefighters, paramedics, police officers. And all you have to do is physically get yourself to Southern California or Ohio. Everything else is taken care of. That's kind of like the Reader's Digest of my recovery. And one quick thing I want to share about speaking and talking, because now I speak across the nation. I speak to police departments, to first responders, to the military. I never envisioned that I would do this. I mean, 2 years ago, I was embarrassed to even talk about what I'd been through. I was embarrassed to share my feelings or to share what I did. And I have to mention this because I laugh about it today, but there's a former cop I didn't know. He found me on LinkedIn and he was harassing me for a year. He's like, I want you on my show. I want to interview you. I'm like, I'm not interested, man. I don't do that. I've never done it. He's like, look, and he lived 2.5 hours away. I didn't know this guy, but he'd been following me on social media. And he's like, look, I will drive to you. I'll set up the camera. Just meet me at Mimi's Cafe. We'll just knock it out. It'll take an hour and I'll be done. And so we did it. And I have to tell you, it was the most freeing thing I've ever done, knowing that it was all out there. He shared it. I mean, good, bad, ugly, and different. I couldn't hide from it anymore. It was like, you know what? This final burden was off my shoulders. I'm not going to be ashamed. Listen to it if you want to. You know, if you don't like it or you look down on me, that's on you. Okay. But what I did find, and this was remarkable, and this is why I do what I do today, is I got so many messages sent to me from people sharing their personal experiences on how something I said resonated with them. And that's the thing, is that we're not all the same, but we go through a lot of the same things. And I guarantee you at least one thing I've said here tonight will resonate with each and every one of you. And that's the key, because we're all human. We're all people. We shouldn't be exposed to this trauma, but we are, because it's our job and we have to do it. And you know, the ironic thing is that I learned through Save a Warrior is that most first responders have some kind of childhood trauma. They just do. I didn't want to hear it. I was like, stop telling me that. I'm not hearing that, even through my first program I went through. And it doesn't have to be extreme. In my case, it wasn't. It was an emotionally distant parent. That was it. But for a lot of people, it's abuse. It's emotional abuse. It's physical abuse. It's sexual abuse. It could be a family member, a friend of a family. It could be alcoholic parent, an addict parent. But these things, they shape us to who we are, to become caretakers, to people that take charge, that can face adversity, that show resiliency, that overcome this negativity. And we get through it as a child. And it actually makes us phenomenal first responders and military members. That's the ironic thing about it, is that our childhood trauma actually makes us better at what we do. But here's the key, and I made this mistake, is I didn't address it or acknowledge it. I was in denial of it until August. Yeah, it was there, and it had an effect on me. It affected my personal relationships. I had a fear of abandonment. I didn't realize that. But again, I didn't want to hear that. I'm a big bad cop. I'm an Air Force captain. I'm not weak. I wasn't a child. You mean I was a child? I got upset as a child? No. I was a badass my whole life. No, we're not. We want to think that way. And you know what? A lot of times we have to be that on the streets or in the battlefield. We're trained that way. We have to be that way. But we also have to take care of ourselves. And that's why I do what I do. We need to change the culture. We need to change the stigma, and we need to normalize what we see and what we go through, because it is normal. And everybody on this call is normal. And there's nothing wrong with us. It's post-traumatic stress injury, not disorder. It's a fact. There's a chemical and physical change to the human brain as a result to exposure to trauma, whether it's a single huge event or repeated trauma, it has an effect. And so that's part of changing the stigma. That word disorder, that prevented me, and it prevents a lot of people from raising their hand up and saying, I need help. Because dear God, I don't want to think I have a disorder. If I have a disorder, something's wrong with me. You know, you weren't born with this. You didn't inherit it. It's an injury. No different than how many officers and soldiers injure their knees, their back, their shoulder. And that's okay. We accept that. Well, it's time to accept post-traumatic stress injury, because it's real and it happens. But there is hope. We just got to talk about it.
Michael.
You're 100% on point, Mike. 100% on point. We definitely have to normalize these conversations. And you know, the one thing I would say, and you've touched on, and again, I've heard your story a number of times, and I think I shared this with you previously, is our culture. Our culture in public safety doesn't allow for us to normalize these conversations. And you know, I shared with you previously, you know, it all starts with leadership. It all starts at the chief's desk. I'm sorry, but that's just my personal opinion. Having led a law enforcement agency, it starts at the chief's desk. Leaders have to start stepping up and letting their staff know that we're behind you, we support you. You're not going to lose your gun, your badge, your car, your house, and your puppy dog because you raise your hand and ask for help. Sometimes we all have to take a knee, take a breath, and then step off again, right? So I think there's a lot of things that need to happen. We need to normalize these conversations even at the leadership level, and make sure that people are getting the actual support that they actually need. And I just realized I cut Sarah off, so my huge apology, Sarah. Or I cut somebody off.
No worries. Sarah. No, I'm glad that you spoke up. Actually, my question was along the lines, Michael, thank you so much for sharing. And I think again, as a civilian, before I was doing this, there you do have this kind of detached feeling with law enforcement. Like, I think from my perspective was like, you know, thank God we, you know, these are the protectors. But to hear the stories and to understand it closer up, you know, kind of just, I don't think we normally think about that. Like, oh my gosh, people are seeing everybody's worst day up close. So my question is, after hearing your story, it sounds like the way that your department and all the charges, you know, all the everything that happened afterward was so traumatic also. So like this double trauma. What could your department have done to help you? What can departments do after something horrible like this happens, where you actually have to take somebody's life to save other people's lives? What could they have done to support their officers?
I'll give you some simple examples on how to just change the culture. And as Dave said, it starts at the top, but it's at all levels of leadership. And, you know, you have to change it on a daily basis. So when the big things happen, it's still there. You can't just have this for the crazy natural disasters or the incident that happens every 20 years. This has to be commonplace. It has to be normal. And so an example of that is, you know, I was a patrol sergeant, and so I had lineups every single day before we hit the streets. And usually we have a half hour of time, and it's honestly, it's pretty much a waste. You're like reading through the call logs. You're talking about the calls that happened the day before from the other teams that you weren't there for. Maybe some administrative stuff like, hey, you got to get the flu shot. Make sure you do this training. But you need to use that time. As an example, let's say the day before, my team had a fatal car accident they went to. Okay, they happen a lot. They've seen them before. But what if I open up that lineup and say, you know what? We're not going to talk about these other calls today. I want to talk about that fatal car accident. But before we go around the room, if you want to, I'm going to share, and I would just start with myself. And I'm going to say, I want to let you know how that affected me. I want to let you know how I felt about that. You know, about how I couldn't get the image of the child that was in the back out of my head because I thought about this. I'm personalizing it, but I'm showing the team as a leader, it's okay to talk about my feelings. And you have to do this. That way other people feel comfortable opening up about this. An example that I know of firsthand, I spoke at a department here in Northern California, and this lieutenant I met, they had a peer support training like most departments do. It's like once a year, everybody goes. I'm not talking about the peer support people, but for the whole department. And this lieutenant, out of the blue, it wasn't planned. He decided to open up in front of the entire department. So brand new officers still on FTO, all the way to the chief. And he shared about how his life, after a couple shootings and really bad incidents, just started nosediving, about how he got help and how he came out of it. And nobody had any clue. Nobody. Like, people were in shock because we do such a good job of putting on this front for everybody that nothing's wrong, everything is okay. And so by him doing that as a lieutenant, he showed everybody, especially those brand new officers, that it's okay to do this. And so that's why I'm saying you have to do it at every single level. And like Dave said, so if you have a chief that's fortunate enough to have been involved in critical incidents or who has supported them, they need to speak about it. They need to share their firsthand experience, because I guarantee you most chiefs have been through hundreds of traumatic incidents. Why? Because they're cops. We all go through traumatic incidents, you know, and so they need to talk about that. They need to share it. And so it's at all levels. And the thing is, it's so easy. This doesn't cost any money to do. It doesn't even take any training. It's what I said earlier to Chris. It's about speaking from the heart. That's all you have to do. If you just keep it real and speak from the heart, and you just share it and you talk about it, get it out there, you move on. Because I believe that if you address these things as they're happening in all these little incidents, it gets taken care of. You can work an entire career, no problem. You can have a good life on the other side. See, I made the mistake. I didn't talk about it. I didn't share it. I started isolating. I started drinking. I started doing all these just negative behaviors, negative coping mechanisms. You know, we all hear about the stories of gambling, porn addiction, extramarital affairs, alcohol, drugs. These aren't all things I did, but I'm just saying these are things that we all know, we personally know other first responders have partaken in it, and that's not healthy. What we need to talk about is, you know, how things affect us. One thing that came up recently, and I want to talk about this real quick in an interview, was I was a field training officer. But I remember my first week when I was in training, I went to 2 just really heinous calls. I mean, my first week, one of them, I had to go to an autopsy. And literally I was seeing this elderly woman. She was being cut open. She'd been burnt, charred flesh was falling off. Turns out the coroner pulled a rag out of her throat. Turns out the son-in-law had knocked her out, stuck a rag down her throat, set the house on fire and killed her. And I remember after that call, I went out with my training officer and he started joking about it. And this is how we deal with this as first responders. We joke about it. He made light of it. And so I learned right then and there, my first week, that, okay, this is how we're going to deal with this. We're going to joke about it. We're just going to laugh it off and we're going to pretend like it's not affecting us. But what if he would have taken that moment after that? That was heinous. I mean, I can't describe to you what it's like to see a human body cut open and just, why didn't he talk about that? Why did he joke about it? But why did I do the same thing when I was a training officer? Why didn't I talk about it? It's so simple. But what do? We laugh about it. We joke about it because that's our coping mechanism. And we learn that from day one. That's how you deal with it. So we change it right away. We change it in the academy. You have people come in, share their stories like Chris, like myself, like any other first responder. You have them share a deep personal story. Then you start it with the FTO process. You re-emphasize it after traumatic calls. You do it at lineup. And after the, you know, the kind of medium-sized incidents, you have critical incident debriefs where you bring in a therapist from outside. You go around and you talk about it. This is how you normalize it.
One of the ways that I really work to kind of make an image to think about it. So for myself personally, when I battled suicidal ideation for an entire year, it took me a while to realize that I didn't ask for those thoughts. Yeah, I didn't wake up and say, you know, I want to think these thoughts every single day. In fact, I woke up every single day doing everything I possibly knew. Like I was seeing a therapist. I had seen my primary care physician. I was doing all the things that I knew to you know, fight this battle, right? So one of the things that when I walked myself into the psychiatric unit, I had to have this aha moment that I was not my thoughts. Jennifer, all of me, I'm not my thoughts. And I have had to really come up with this like analogy that if you and I, Michael, were driving in a car today or a truck and the check oil light came on, what would you do? You would check your oil. If the check tire pressure light came on, what would you do? You would check your tire. If the check engine light came on, we've all been kind of taught that realistically it's stupid to drive for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 7 months, a year, 4 years, 10 years with a check engine light on. And so in my book, I talk about check engine lights and how realistically, if you pay attention to the check oil right away, just like you said, and the check that tire pressure right away, which is really the signs of stress and depression and anxiety, all of those other things, if we pay attention to those lights soon, we can prevent that check engine light. But still, the issue is like, why is there so much shame when I'm the one having suicidal ideation thoughts every day on repeat for a year? That check engine light's blaring at me saying, pay attention to me, do something with me. And there's nowhere to drive my car in, nowhere to drive my car in without fear of losing my job, my family, my wife, my children, all those things. And that's the conversation that we are all desperately trying to have, and to create those places where it is safe, these outside places that you've talked about, that's why these conversations are so important, is because there are people right now who are having thoughts of suicide. And if they go into their department, which is still not able to handle them, they might lose their job. And that's why these conversations are so important, Sarah and Michael, right? That's why you and I do what we do, is because we're trying to say there are other outside safe areas where you can check in those lights and get those things checked out. But one of the biggest things you have to realize is you're not your thoughts. There's more to you than your thought. And you have to have that aha moment, because otherwise you're going to be filled with shame and guilt that you're having those thoughts. And when I walked myself into the psychiatric unit, I wanted to crawl under a rock. I felt like I had let my entire family down. When the truth of the matter is, had I let my family down, or had I just made the bravest decision I'd ever have to make at 26 years old? And Michael and Sarah, you guys don't know this part about my story, but my mother-in-law used the fact that I had walked myself into the psychiatric unit, and she had my kids taken away from me when my husband was killed. I had to fight for 8 months in a judicial system. I had to have a 3-day psychiatric evaluation done to prove that there was nothing wrong with me, that I had PTSD, and that I needed support. I had to fight for 8 months in a very unfair judicial system to get my girls back. And that's why you see me show up so boldly, Michael, because I absolutely know what's at stake when you share with the wrong person, right? So that's why you see me show up, because what did I do wrong? Other than say, I'm having thoughts of suicide, which was not my fault. So why I am so passionate about working with veterans and first responders is because of the fortitude that it takes. And I understand that. And not everyone has that, but that's why I love the work that I do. Because I enjoy working with people and helping you get rid of that shame and that guilt and all of those different things that you carry privately, right? So I just, hearing you tonight, this is the first time that I've heard you do it live, and it was all I could do to not break down and cry. Because getting in trouble for doing the right thing should not be, right? You guys are honorable, and you show up every single day to put your life on the line for strangers, and then you do the right thing, and then you get your nose drugged through it. And that's why we're out there fighting this together, all of us. And so thank you for just sharing that so boldly, Michael.
Thank you for
Jennifer,
sharing.
what's the name of your book?
Thank you.
Yeah, so my book is called Inside the Mind of Suicide, From Deepest Darkness to the Light of Hope. And as Michael knows, I've been working on version 2.0. And so it's been a tough year for me.
Michael,
Jennifer, sorry, Jennifer, if I can just break in for a minute. First of all, what you did by walking yourself into the psychiatric. The most courageous, the bravest thing you could have done.
Sam,
Looking
you know
back on
you're
it,
muted, right?
I was. So I'm going to start again. Just, Jennifer, it was the most courageous, the bravest thing you've done. Michael, I know we've talked briefly on the phone, but hearing you with your story, it's just, like Jennifer said, we're all trying to hold back those tears. And Chris, those tears are great because, and I've said this to a number of you that I've had the conversation, when I, as a trauma responder, go out to do that debriefing, I'm looking for those people who are crying, because that's an indicator that the healing process is starting. Mm-hmm. And Dave, you talked about the culture, and you and I have talked about this as well. When I've had the honor to do debriefs at police services with a peer support, it's some of the most unbelievable work that I do, because I'm the outsider. right? The peer support is the guy who understands. He's the brother in arms. That's not me. And I just find it's such a privilege to be able to sit back and be called upon when needed for some expertise, and that's okay. But to see every once in a while when I do these kinds of debriefs, and you see the light go on inside one or two people, and I'm looking for that. And those are the guys who have that aha moment that we talk about, right? And those are the guys I know at some point are going to be taking those steps that they need to take to heal. So, Michael, kudos to you, and just enjoy partaking in these.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Can I add to what Tracy said? I know I've shared this in group, but we're first responders. For those that don't know, I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse over 30 years. And I want to say, the hardest thing is to go in and ask for help. But those of us that have been through it, we also know that it's important to make sure that those that are there that are available for help are the correct person that we're going to. Because I know when I went in as a nurse for help, I was told by the provider, whatever you do, don't tell your colleagues because no one is ever going to want to work with you again. Yep. And that put all that added shame that I had no clue existed onto me. And I know all these years later that I'm involved with suicide prevention and suicide prevention resources because I had that added struggle thrown on me, which I don't even want to go into, but that's what makes me so, I won't use curse words here, but that's what makes me so good at what I do, because I was so wronged in the way I was treated and the things I was told that it affected my own recovery. But that is what I'm learning to use to help others. But because that stigma was put on me as a first responder, it makes it difficult for me to do it as a nurse. I can do it as the person who went through something, but to throw my nurse part on top of it makes it more difficult. And even all these years later, you can hear it in my voice. It's still, I want to say my hatred towards that provider, but it needs to be used by those of us that have been through it to make sure that the providers that are providing the right stuff that we need to get through it.
Yeah, I think that that's kind of what I was going to ask you, Michael, was I know that there was an element of betrayal for you, but when you reached out for help, it was kind of after, right?
Yeah, when I finally reached out for help, we're talking 4 years later. So the betrayal for me started 5 months. It was that coroner's inquest, and it was that first meeting with my administration.
Right.
And that kind of started the betrayal aspect.
Right.
I felt like, they were abandoning me at that point,
Mm-hmm.
and questioning my everything, my integrity, my leadership ability. And so that kind of got the ball rolling. In all defense too, though, I'm talking about maybe one or two people, not the entire agency. And that's something to keep in mind too, is that for leaders out there and people in positions of authority, they don't realize oftentimes the impact they can have on someone's life, and they can literally make or break somebody's life. Or like we're talking about today, push them over the edge.
It's right at such a vulnerable time, isn't it? A deeply, deeply vulnerable time. Like what Jennifer was talking about after her husband and daughter were killed, you after such a huge incident. That is such a deeply vulnerable time. So
it happened again when I finally asked for help, saying I'm going to get help. And then it happened again, several times actually, which that will be in my book that's coming out. We'd be here all night, but trust me, there's a lot to that administrative betrayal. And that's going to be all in my new book that's coming out soon. So, but that's why if anybody's listening that's in a position of authority, and Dave, this more than anybody, being a chief, you can make or break it, and they set the tone at the top on how it's going to be. And so that just filters downward. And if you got people in key positions that are in charge of peer support, in charge of wellness, they have to live it, breathe it. They have to believe it, not just check a box and say we have this program. So that's what a lot of agencies are doing, is they're just checking the box saying, yeah, we got peer support, we do this. But, reality, and Sam, you talked about being the therapist that comes out there for the critical incident debriefs, which is amazing, and we need that. But the culture has to allow for the officers to open up during those debriefs.
Mhm.
And for me, I didn't feel comfortable then. We actually had a great therapist. She's amazing, but I didn't feel comfortable opening up. And so that's why you have to have it where the culture allows that to happen. And that way people like Sam, you can do your job effectively and help people and get them to open up. Because if they don't feel comfortable, they're not going to do it.
And Michael, that's why I was saying when I said that some of the really great moments was when the culture of that debrief with the peer support clearly, and I got to know certain peer supports who I really like to work with, because the moment we got into that room, they were setting that culture.
Exactly.
And that was just a wonderful thing to see.
Absolutely.
Michael, can I ask a quick question here?
Of course.
Well, there's really nothing quick with me, unfortunately, but I don't want to take anything away from what we're talking about, because everything we're talking about is unbelievable. It's just awesome. My personal question to you, because I've got my own story, is with all the trauma you've gone through, has anything good come from any of this?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the fact that I'm retired and I'm a dad and I'm here for my daughter all the time, and I'm just living. Yeah. So a lot of good has come from it. So I don't know if you mean personally or other ways, but
Yeah, I mean, on every level, because I mean, there's so many things that have happened since I
my
retired.
life is
My buddy was
totally
killed.
different. Like I used to be a black and white person. I used to be very rigid. I looked at things very one dimensional, and I just had a different outlook on life. Whereas now I really appreciate everything. I appreciate everybody. I look at things totally different. As an example, like when I used to think about, I was undercover. I was an undercover task force officer on a state drug task force. And so drugs is my thing. And I targeted, mid to level drug dealers, but I had to get the users to turn them as informants. But now I look at addicts totally different. Like I get it. I understand it. And I know first responders who are addicts and alcoholics. And so I don't look at that as a black and white issue or a criminal issue. I look at it as, man, this person's got some trauma. Like they've had some things happen in their life and they started coping with it in a negative way with drugs and alcohol or other things. And so that alone has given me a whole new outlook on just people in general. People down on their luck, people that are suffering, people that are even committing petty crimes. Like, why are they doing it? To pay for their drugs. They're not bad people, but I used to really live in a world of good people and bad people. And it was very black and white, and it was based on the law. And I don't look at life or people that way at all. So just the beauty of that alone, it's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And I still have work to do. I'm still in recovery. I'm not perfect by any means. I never will be. But I know I'm a better father because of it. I know I'm a better brother because of it. And my thing is now just sharing the love. Like we talked about, I just want to share the love. I want to show people that, man, there's an amazing life on the other side, because my life is amazing. I'm retired and I just volunteer. That's what I do, and it's like the toys don't matter. What matters is people and helping people. And that's what really matters. So it's just.
And Chris, I want to give a shout out for Michael, because, as far as something positive that's come out for it, the other day inside of LinkedIn, he did his regular posts, that he did. And someone said, brother, because of you, I made that courageous step to go get help. Like, you have saved my life.
There you go. That's exactly what I'm talking about right there.
So, the power of his story, he has no idea how many people have done that privately, but this person was bold enough to actually put it on LinkedIn and say, I've been following you for quite some time and I'm going to go do it. And so, like, those, for myself as well, right? Those are the moments where you're like, yes, that brings purpose to the pain that we carried. And yeah, so I just want to give a shout out, like, on that level.
Yeah.
That's what he's doing.
And
And I
thank
think
you,
it's
Jennifer.
also the power. It's Michael, thank you, but I really appreciate you sharing. And what I see in it is the power of brokenness. There's power in brokenness because you can hear, you can really reach out people that are broken, and we're all broken. It's part of humanity. We all have different way and different places where we are broken. And when you acknowledge your brokenness, you can reach out to the brokenness of someone else and bring healing.
Mhm.
It's this famous book that is called the Wounded Healer.
Mm.
That you cannot reach out powerfully to someone and heal them if you're not reaching out to them from that place where you were wounded.
Yeah.
And that's the power of those stories, and that's the power of those conversations. Is something in your heart touch the thing, something in the heart of someone else, because we all have a level of brokenness somewhere. And when we hide it, it fester and it become infected and it becomes deadly. But when we open it, it brings mutual healing.
Mhm.
Powerful. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. You just hit it right on the head. I mean,
Yeah,
that's,
I've never heard of that, but that's beautiful. The wounded healer. That's
yeah.
beautiful.
Thank you, Mike, for sharing your story. I have so much respect for you guys. And my name is Melissa. I live in Linda Vista, San Diego. And I am actually not, I don't work in law enforcement. I have a large law enforcement family, but I work with law enforcement, the San Diego Police Department, out in our community 3 days a week. And so live in a neighborhood that is diverse. It's known as an under-resourced neighborhood. There's a lot of bridges that need to be built there. Beautiful in ways. We just had another gang shooting happen. But yeah, so I'm in a position where I just have a heart to be kind of a bridge within our community. My husband and I do, our church does a lot of community work here as well. We live in the neighborhood. And so as I'm here with the people, and then also connected to law enforcement and get to work with officers throughout the week, just something really powerful is happening there, and some of the trust that's built there has really been good. But what is one of the things that you would want communities that are not very connected to law enforcement at all, or have a lot of fear, what would you want them to know, I think, about what you guys do? And you shared so much of those pieces, which I love. Thank you so much for sharing your story. But yeah, do you have any, is there something that you would want people to know that just have no personal connection to law enforcement?
Absolutely. And, it goes back to being human. I mean, we're human. Mm-hmm. In many cases, we're parents, we're fathers, we're mothers, we're brothers, we're sisters. As I mentioned earlier about our exposure to traumatic incidents, nobody should be exposed to what we are. And we don't choose to be exposed to that. We have to be exposed to it because it's our job. And what I think it's important is that the public realizes that we put up this image of, stone, cold-faced, almost like robots that just go in and get the job done. And we do that for self-protection, but that's not who we are.
Yeah.
We go into these most dangerous situations, we have to put up an image and an air of confidence to where people are going to listen to us and let us take charge. But we may be absolutely shaking inside in absolute fear of our lives, but we can't show that. And so I think the biggest thing with the public is, they don't realize that we have feelings, we have emotions. Yes. They don't realize what we have to deal with on a daily basis. Because if you took any person, let's say took yourself, okay, just take yourself, and we expose you to 500 traumatic incidents. That's going to have an effect on who you are as a person, on your relationships, on everything you do, whether it's at work or at home. And so, they just need to understand who we are, what we do. And I think that's through education and awareness. I know there's things like ride-alongs and citizen academies, but having real discussions, like maybe having them come in a forum and having an officer talk about how a traumatic incident has affected them. For a person to see that and feel that, that's just human emotion and human feelings. And it's going to cut right through to them, even though they're not first responders or cops. They're going to see the human inside that person that's speaking to them, because they're speaking from the heart. That's all you really need to do, is just speak from the heart. They need to see it.
I think one of the things I would tag on that, Michael,
Yeah.
is with our society and there being a lot of video games, what I've seen is that there's a lot of playing with guns. There's a lot of video game and people die and then they get to hit that restart button. And so they have almost become numb to the fact that what you see every day is real life. And getting people in society who don't understand the real life because they play it. It's almost like they have lowered how bad it really is because they can sit there and kill people and then they just restart the life button. And so that was kind of the bridge that I worked really hard helping people understand. Officers don't get to restart and hit a restart button. Like if they show up on a scene, that person really died. This is not a video game. And so to me, do you agree with that, Michael? It's like, this is real life. This is not a video game. You get to hit a button and restart and get 3 more lives. Like this is really affecting you and the people that you saw, and you carry all of that with you.
Well, it's not just that, it's the fact that we have to make split-second decisions.
Yes.
And, you know, we know hindsight's 2020, but and there's been a lot of reporters that have done this recently, but when they do the use of force training with law enforcement departments, where they do simulated training, like shoot, don't shoot scenarios, that's very eye-opening. And that's another way that you can get influential or key people within communities. It could be church leaders, teachers. I mean, you can't get everybody through these programs, but you've got to get people that are in positions of influence and authority within their own communities to share this knowledge. And so if you expose them to these aspects, that can filter down. And that's, like Dave said earlier, it's leadership at the top, you know? And those are just basic examples. But like Jennifer said too, not just the video games, if you look at our inner cities and the drive-by shootings, a lot of our youth today, they don't expect to live. They look at death differently than we do. You know, and that's part of change. That's what something going on with the audio here, but that's a whole nother thing that we have to address, you know, is just the outlook on life and the value of life is what it comes down to.
Absolutely. I see that in our youth too. Them valuing themselves is a huge part of the conversation. Thank you so much for sharing that too. I mean, that's part of the vision for our neighborhood is really bringing those two worlds together. So thank you.
Absolutely.
If I can hop on that too, I'm really thrilled that Melissa, that you're here. And my son actually ended up in a conversation with Melissa, and that's how we got connected.
Nice.
Tyrone, which he had to go, but I saw him on the news on the Atlanta news station, and it caught my attention because he was a a gang investigator in Atlanta, and he had a huge passion for getting conversations going with the community and the cops. So he would go to the barbershops and they would just start having conversations. And so it ended up becoming kind of a big thing, and he was very well liked in Atlanta. And, you know, and so he finally said, though, he finally left. He said, you know, I'm one bullet away from death, and I am one mistake away from indictment. So he left that, but he's continuing with this Clippers and Cops, and that is to pull people together to have the conversation. And so anyway, I was so glad that he was here, and he actually came and shared his story and talked to us also a couple months ago. And then I think he and Melissa are talking. So I think, again, these talks it has a ripple effect. And so again, I'm so glad that you have the courage to share your story, Michael. Even Jennifer coming on and sharing your story. I think there really is so much power. Chris, thank you so much for being open. You know, it's really powerful. Jonathan, I kept thinking that you wanted to say something. I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't, but I thought a couple times you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I have a few questions if there's time. Michael, thank you for sharing your story. It does take a lot of strength and courage to do that. I went through something similar and have gone down the path of helping law enforcement officers with everything that we talked about. My question for you is, was there a spiritual component towards your recovery?
Yes, but well, actually, there is. See, I always, when I hear spiritually, I know it's not religion, but I'm a recovering Catholic, so I always mention that. But um, basically, I find it in nature. And so when I went to the West Coast post-trauma retreat, it actually put me out in nature. And after that, I started getting into hiking a lot. And that's where I find spirituality, is being out in nature and near the ocean, rivers. And so I absolutely think there is a component to that. And not in a religious sense, but like you're saying, in a spiritual sense. Like there's a higher power, there's a higher being, there's more to this world. And I just feel really connected and grounded out in nature. So for me, it's absolutely necessary in my recovery.
Has that helped you see the world from a different perspective? Like you said, when I was a cop, I used to tell everybody, the world operates in the gray, but it's judged in black and white, which is literally a book. And when I got out after going through what I went through and found my spirituality, it seemed like my world opened up to being able to see people as humans, like you said. And I think that was really powerful for me, because just like you didn't have a superior come to you and say, "Hey, Michael, are you okay?" That's what law enforcement is dealing with too on a day-to-day basis, right? We don't know what those people are going through. And one of my issues is how cops approach people. There are some that are on edge and they're burnt out and they're fried. And that's what we need to try to avoid as well, in my opinion, right? Being in this field. So next question I would have for you is, other than having these conversations, which are just so powerful, what other changes do you see need to be made within police departments, academies, leadership, etc.?
I mentioned some of this earlier, but you need to start talking about trauma and the impact of trauma at the academy. I mean, you just need to do it right away. I know academies are pushed for time. That's the big thing, is, they have a set amount of hours and they need bodies. And so you got to get people in there. And if you add something, you got to cut something. But we need to make it a priority. I mean, as far as resiliency and health of our officers, that needs to be part of the culture. And it really hasn't been. An example is, I worked at an agency where we always wanted where they would pay us to work out for an hour, like do exercise. And there was all these arguments for years of why we couldn't do it. If you got injured in the gym, as a work comp injury. But you have to make it a healthy environment, and you have to encourage healthy activities on all levels. So whether it means financial, physical, emotional, you have to really focus on your people's health. And we're not doing that. And it's hard because we're understaffed, especially now. You got people retiring in record numbers. So almost every single agency is understaffed, but they're on a hiring freeze because of COVID. So you got people doing way more with less. And now you have officers who aren't being proactive because, like it was mentioned, they don't want to be indicted every time they make a traffic stop and end up in prison. And so now you have DAs that aren't supporting their officers, at least here in California. You've got DAs that are indicting officers left and right. You've got city managers, city councils that are doing the same, and they're falling into politics. And the fact of the matter is, officers need to know somebody has their back. That's what it comes down to at all levels. And so they need to know, of course, the agency has their back. But if you work in a city, the city council, the city manager, the mayor, they have to have your back. If you work in a county, the same thing. I mean, I can't even begin to talk about what's going on in Contra Costa County and San Francisco County with the two DAs there. I mean, they're literally prosecuting righteous use of force cases. And now that's going to cost lives because officers are not going to take action when they should. Officers are going to hesitate, and it's going to cost lives. It's a fact. It's already happening. I've been talking to a lot of officers lately, And no pun intended on firefighters, because they have the right idea, and I wish I would have been a firefighter, much better choice. But yeah, we know now, but we joke about that on the streets, but we know better now. But the fact is that officers, they're just going to want to sit in a department and only go out for the really big calls, like the active shooters, like the really bad in progress stuff. They're not going to be doing car stops. They're not going to be doing business checks. They don't want to do anything to put themselves out there. And that's what we need to do. We need to be in touch with our community, with our people. But how can we do that if we're hiding in the station? But literally, that's what it's coming to right now, is officers are scared to act. They're scared to do their job. And so when you ask that question, it's such a complex and such a difficult question. But first and foremost, we got to hire the right people, right? And that's getting questionable as we speak right now, but we can't lower our standards. If anything, we have to raise our standards. And that goes into academy training. That goes into adding more things, making more requirements. But really, these people have to know someone has their back, someone supports them. Because who's going to want to stay in this job? I mean, who's going to want to do 30 years in a job where everybody hates you and nobody has your back? I mean, times have changed. It's not the same as when I started. And I really feel for my brothers and sisters that are still out there in uniform, because they have it worse than I ever had it. I mean, right now, today, it is, at least in my lifetime, the worst time to be in law enforcement, period. It just is. And we need to change that. And I know it was mentioned earlier about improving relationships with our community. We need to do that. And we have community support. That's just going to go upwards and it's going to go outwards. And so we need to do that. We can't just say, look at us. We're the cops. This is what we need. Here's what we're going to do. No. We need to work together on this. It needs to be a partnership. But Jonathan, you mentioned this earlier, and this struck me to a chord. And I talked about this earlier, but it was how I looked at people. It was how I talked to people. I was an asshole. I was extremely proactive. I made usually 30 stops a day, 12 to 14 tickets, 1 to 2 arrests a day. I mean, that's what I did. I used to call it touching lives. I mean, I joke about that now because I really touch lives now. I didn't touch lives back then. I affected people's days. I caused people to have a bad day because of how I talked to them, how I interacted with them. And yeah, there's certain times where you have to take certain stances and you have to talk to people a certain way to get compliance. You just do. And if you haven't been there, you won't understand that. Yeah. But what we can do, and this is the biggest thing, is when things have calmed down, we can explain things. We can talk to people and say, hey, you know what? I want to let you know why I did what I did when I first rolled up here. Here's why. Here's what I was thinking. They may not hear it. They may not want to listen. But if you keep trying that long enough and you open up those lines of communication, it's going to have a positive effect. Yeah. And that's that education awareness, is just explaining what we're doing. Take a little extra time on the back end of what we do. Once it's safe to do so, explain to citizens, this is why we do this. This is why we do that. Because they don't know. We expect them to know because we know it so well. We don't ever think anything about it. It's second nature, but they have no clue why we're doing what we're doing. So let's educate them every step of the way and make that normal practice.
Well, and one thing that I heard you say, and your character got attacked. And that's when you made the shift. You went from the person that wanted to help everybody to then being the criminal and having to defend yourself. I have a question for Dave, if you don't mind. As a chief, what are you doing different in your department to bring this trust and transparency to your officers that are coming in at the FTO level and all the way up?
So, Jonathan, I'm currently retired.
Okay, if you were, what would you do different?
However, that doesn't prevent me from finger wagging my former peers and giving them kind of the understanding that we collectively as leaders need to be more approachable. Okay, our officers, our staff, they depend on our support every day. Okay, we shouldn't be bending to political will, because that doesn't do. We already see what happens. And to Mike's point, with the DAs up in NorCal and even the DAs down here, they're all bending to political will, and they're putting people through the ringer to save their own careers more than anything else. And that's a travesty, especially when they're righteous uses of force, et cetera. And to Mike's point, you know, we don't need cops hiding in the police station. They need to be out in the community, getting to know the community. But the reality is supporting your officers. Okay. I used to tell my officers every day that I love, respected, and admired them. And I use those exact words. Okay. That's unheard of. Okay. Most of the time you never hear a chief say he loves anything except maybe his whiskey. And I do love whiskey. But my point there is being transparent, being authentic, and engaging the troops in a meaningful way. Right. And that's being a human being, you know. And again, it's up to leaders to really change the culture. You know, every time I talk to another one of my former peers, you know, I kind of, you know, I ask them, hey, how's it going? You know, how are things going? You know, and it's you know, there's a lot of typical things. And as a chief, you know, we get bogged down in meeting after meeting. I can remember days where I went to work with a bag full of food, and I came home with a bag full of food, because there was no way that I was going to be able to eat my lunch or do anything, because I'm on phone calls, I'm on conference calls, I have to go into meetings, I have to go meet with my boss, I have to do this, I have to do that. And after a while, you know, when they say it's lonely at the top, they're not kidding.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's lonely at the top, because here's the reality. When my team does something good, it's because they did it. I didn't do anything. But when things go bad, everybody disappears, and it's only me standing behind the podium trying to explain what happened on the 6 o'clock news, right? But the reality is that's what I signed up for as a leader. And we have to be able to stand up and stand in front of our troops and stand behind them when they're having problems or challenges. And they shouldn't have to worry about their administration going, you know, I don't trust you now, because you said you raised your hand and had a problem. So now I have to take some kind of action because maybe I feel you're a liability. Well, let's dig into that a little bit. Are you really a liability, or are you just having a problem like everybody else? We're humans. And to Mike's point and Jennifer's point, just be human. Just be on the level with people. You know, if I was still in command of an agency, I would do the same things I'm telling you right now. I would tell my officers I love, respect, and admire them, because they do have a hard job, and they need to hear that from their leaders, because they're not hearing that from the community right now. They're not. They need to hear it from their leaders, and they need to be reminded every day how important they really are to the community. And as a chief and as a former law enforcement leader, that's an important thing to tell people, you know. And that's something that a chief should be telling the public. Hey, I love, trust, and respect and admire my officers. Yeah. So should you. You know, they should be out in front, you know, because that's what a leader does. You know, so that's just my 2 cents, but that's where I come from.
I think for me, Jonathan, I had a really unique perspective. Being the victim, I don't know if you know my story or not, but my husband and daughter were killed by a drunk driver. And I had 2 daughters that survived that day. And it took me 5 or 6 years to get to the point where I could talk about it. And then I joined a task force. So for 10 years, I served on a task force in Denver. And I've been kind of holding this coin all night, because on the back of this coin, it says, courteous but firm. And that's exactly what you're talking about, Dave. But when I served on this task force, here's the thing. I was commissioned to be there by the governor to remind everyone around this massive table of people that behind every number and statistic was a life. Now, everyone loved it when Jennifer would chime in on the victim side. Like, they wanted me to chime in only on the number and statistic on the victim side. But when I stood up and said, wait a minute, how we treat these other people on this other side, who are human, who are husbands, who are sometimes police officers and firefighters, who've seen so much trauma and now have found themselves into trouble, right? They're a life as well. They're not just a number and statistic. And so I would bring this very well-rounded opinion to this table and say, these are all humans. Every single life, behind every number, there was this life. And I was shushed. I was shushed for years. And I had to endure years and years. And finally, after years, when I walked into that room, I earned the respect from people around that table, because I was told, because I went in and forgave the man that killed my husband and daughter, I was told that I sided with offenders, that I didn't care about victims. Now, here's the honest to God truth. If I care about recidivism, reducing it, if I care at all about you officers that do this, if I can teach the man who killed my husband and daughter to forgive himself so he doesn't go out and recidivate, that is keeping other people who are out in that community safe. And I was shushed for years for doing that. And I had to endure. And that's why I'm calling out to all of our officers now. And this is not an easy time to be an officer, but hold that line. Hold that line with honor and strength and keep holding it.
Hey, Jennifer, can I jump in on that for a second?
Yeah.
I know for a fact you already know this, but those people that are telling you that are shushing you have never been in your shoes. So shame on them for doing that. That's a bunch of shit. I'm sorry to say it that way, but that's exactly what it is. So kudos to you for standing up for yourself.
It took a lot, but I endured it. And when I walked out of that room after 10 years, I walked out with some pretty firm handshakes and respect.
Good. I'm glad.
Don't you think you had the strength because you had been through that trauma, and you had the foresight and you had the empathy to see that person as a human and possibly willing, to be restored, or to, it's giving people a chance to be restored and become their better self again, and not have it be a life sentence. And just even the ripple effect of that really mercy and that grace that you gave that man. I mean, that is so powerful.
Michael, it comes back to what you were saying. It's like everything's black and white, but until it's not. Everything's black and white until all of a sudden you're the offender, right? Until you're the one that's being a piece of shit or whatever, right? And so it's sorting through all of those different pieces. And I just can't tell you how awesome it is to be a part of these conversations with you guys.
Definitely.
Michael, I hope so many people hear this conversation. It's, I love recording the story, and then you hear what everybody else brings to it, and just, it brings such a richness and, different angles of a problem or situation. And I just feel like all of you have contributed so much. This will be a ripple effect. The more people can hear these stories, just to plant a seed. The whole reason even I'm doing this is because one veteran sitting next to me in class shared his story with me. I had no connection to military, no connection to first responders. Maybe a doctor and some nurses, but not law enforcement or firefighters. One conversation of a combat veteran being very vulnerable with me. Then I had him over to my house. I said, you've got to come over with your wife. You have to share your story with my family. I had no idea. And because we are human beings, our connection was I lost my dad by suicide, and he came back with all these medals and, but he wanted to take his life. And so I had an amazing, as two humans, we had that connection. None of the content, I was a stay-at-home mom and he was, Mr. Combat veteran, but we connected in a deeper level in that trauma. Then I had to have my community. I grabbed everybody who would come over. And for every 3 months, I said, we as civilians, we need to hear this. how can we not support our veterans? How can we send 17, 18, 19-year-olds off to war and us be clueless? So again, then they came over. And so again, I'm sharing this to really encourage you all who have these stories of being in law enforcement. And now we have, you know, even Melissa also, who is now trying to get the ball rolling and get these conversations going. It is a ripple effect. It's powerful when you share your story. It really is. It connects us. So thank you. And I'm not trying to end anything if we're not ending this. So I'm going to leave that to Dave.
Can I just, I'm sorry, Dave.
Go ahead, Brenda.
Can I just add that the other thing that I've learned, because I know I'm still healing too, and you know, with the PTSI, you know, it comes back. Just like, you know, I know all of us have tears because it takes a lot to bring me to tears over someone else's story too. You know, and I'm sitting here with tears listening to these stories, but it all comes back to, again, like I was saying, that when you share, and as I was in this group listening to everyone sharing, it's given me more, I want to say, strength to be able to share what I've shared. You know, even though I work with suicide prevention resources and talk to the public all the time, that's one side of me. The other side of me is the nurse that's, you know, wounded inside, that found that bond sharing with, you know, officers and veterans, because it's such a common bond. And like Sarah said, you know, it's that empathy that we see within each other, but there's also a different level where, you know, I trust an officer more because you're an officer, and we're, you know, it's that different culture where an officer will talk to me over someone else and share their story because I'm a nurse. So it's that circle of empathy that when we hear someone else's story, it's the, hey, I'm not alone. You know, I may have gone through it alone, but there's other people that went through it alone too. And now it's to use that to share, to help others to be able to share and come forward and not have that shame and not have that stigma. And that in itself, I want to say, even though like I said, I work in the public with the resources to help, you know, end the stigma, it's still the stigma within myself that to be able to share it with people like you.
And that's, Brenda, that's why, like, we need each other. And Sarah, you said that, like, I had come on and shared my story so courageously, and then like the following week she had another story, and I came on, Brenda, and she's like, that was so sweet. I was like, no, what you don't understand is, like, I have found my people. I can show up 100% authentically in here with all of you, still go out during the day, do the work that I do, but I can show up authentically in here. And even this week, you know, I've had some stuff going on. My grandma and grandpa are dying. And so I reached out to Michael and just said, I just need to be human to human with you this week. Can you just sit with me in the midst of my pain? And right. And so, you know, that's why these circles are sacred, Brenda, right? This is where we get to come back and just bare our souls in this place, because we all have to go back out and work. And so I'm like, I need you guys just as much. So
right. And I'm sorry. And that's where, like, you know, the nurse in me, you know, like with an officer, your role is to fix things. You know, my role is always to listen to others and help them make things better, and to help them get through what they're going through. But on the same hand, we have to learn, and you know, and I'm Dave can tell you, I'm like the hardest headed one, the stubborn, have to be Miss Independent, you know, and to be able to have that trust. I mean, I joke at church, like, I have enough trust issues and you want me to trust God, you know, but it's to find that group and find, you know, where you're 100% comfortable. I know with the guys here, you know, if I'm going to talk on a subject and use my sailor language or whatever, it's going to be okay. I'm not going to get judged because I'm a girl that goes to church one day and you know, I'm here with the guys cursing, you know, the next day, but that's all who I am. And to come here with 100% of that and know I'm not going to get judged. And like, you were saying, someone was saying about how crying, you know, you don't want to cry in public. You know, I have my days where, you know, whatever you say, don't look at me wrong, because I'm going to cry, you know, and we need to know that within our own selves. You know, yes, I'm a nurse, I can take care of people, but you know, I have to stop, and I talk about self-care. I have to self-care me, and I have to know when I need to stop taking care of everyone else and 100% take care of me, because in the end, I'm that, you know, I'm that human with feelings just like everyone else, but people forget because they only see you in your professional role.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing I want to say to Jennifer's point is, you found your tribe. We found our tribe. You know, again, you know, and Sarah and I had this conversation, and I want to say this is at the height of a lot of the civil unrest that was going on pretty much all over the country. And you know, there were a lot of folks under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure over the summer, and that stress and pressure still hasn't relaxed. But this was designed to be that type of space where people can find their tribe, can find their group, don't feel judged, don't feel anything other than camaraderie, a place to communicate, a place to connect with family, you know. And family can be any person or group you want it to be. Family isn't always blood, to be quite frank. So again, you know, we have these calls every week, Thursday at 6:00. Everybody's always welcome. There's no onus that you have to show up, but we're here if you want to. And that's the best part of it. And you know, I'm incredibly grateful to Sarah for being such a good partner and such a good friend, in helping me, you know, navigate my own struggles, my own challenges. Some of you here are new, some of you are familiar with my story as well. But you know, I can always share at another time. But for myself, I'm going to sign off. Taught for 8 hours today, and you know, now I'm a little tuckered out, I think, but I'm incredibly grateful for all of you, and you guys are always welcome. Have nothing but love and respect for you, Mike. Thank you. Lots of love for Jennifer, Chris, Brenda, Tanya, John, all you guys. Incredibly grateful for all of you. Melissa, incredibly grateful for you being on tonight. You guys are always welcome. And I hope everyone has a blessed and wonderful evening.
Good night, Dave. It was, again, so nice to meet you guys, the new faces.
100%. Have a wonderful
Michael,
evening,
thank
guys.
you. Thank
Definitely.
you so much. Thank you, all of you. Thanks so much for being on.
Yep.
Maybe see you
Bye, you guys.
in January. We'll be back.